Welcome to Season 6 of Far Reach Voyages, where we share our love of offshore sailing and adventure travel. In the last episode, I showed how I fabricated and installed an aluminum bar to reinforce the boom for both the main sheet and vane preventer. I also shared how I fabricated reefing line exit boxes and attached backing plates inside the boom. In this episode, I'll complete the boom build series by sharing techniques for how I prepared and painted the boom with Awlgrip using the brush and tip method, producing a finish indistinguishable from a professional spray job. After test fitting all the hardware and satisfied with the fabrication of the new boom, I removed all the parts and washed the boom with hot water mixed with Dawn detergent and TSP. Then I wiped the boom down with Awlgrip T0170 slow evaporation solvent using the 2-rag method to make sure it was thoroughly degreased. Next, I taped off the slot on the underside of the boom where the bales needed to slide during installation and removal. I wanted that area to remain anodized and free of paint. Then I sanded the boom with 60 grit abrasive and used a compressor to blow off any aluminum dust generated during the sanding process. All these paints are pretty technical and it's easy to make a mistake in them. The mixture and the ratios between paints and primers and etchers are different, and I use a fair amount of Awlgrip for my boat, and even though I'm familiar with it, I've put together a binder that I've had for years, highlight all the applicable parts so that every time I go to mix it up, I always open it up and I check it. If you don't, you're going to make a mistake. And, because you're going from one thing to the next. You're doing a couple of coats of primer, and then a few days later, you're doing top coat, and you got a lot of information in your head, and things can get kind of crazy in a boatyard sometimes. You can get distracted. I always just check those ratios before I mix it up to make sure. Before I get started with the boom project, I wanted to take just a minute to explain some of my decisions about the products that I used. Normally, you're better off, for example, if you're going to use Awlgrip, that you use all the Awlgrip products. You stay with that product line, that manufacturer, because they're chemically designed to work together, and there's some risk when you use different products. So I'm not suggesting that somebody else do what I did here. I did this for a specific reason, and time will tell whether I made a good choice or not. I would be disingenuous if I said that I wasn't a bit disappointed in how the Awlgrip paint turned out on the mast when it was originally painted back in 2015. And that's why I had to do the whole project of taking the mast down. I had some paint failure there that just disappointed me. I had originally used Awlgrip Wash Primer CF as the etch coat. So we sanded the mast sections, the bare metal, and then we applied the wash primer. And I don't know if that's what failed. I can't really say, and I don't want to suggest that it did, but I was looking for a better result. And when I was talking to some folks that I trust, they had recommended that I try the AlumiProtect as that etch coating on the bare metal. And after thinking about it a little bit, that's what I chose to do. So as we go into this project and you see me use a Petit product, and I'm using Awlgrip primers and top coat, I just wanted to provide some explanation for that. I try not to tell anybody else what to do when it comes to their boats. I don't want to tell somebody else how to sail it, how to set it up, how to fix it, how to repair it. What I do is I just share what I have done and what has worked for me. And viewers and others that are interested in the work that I've done on the Far Reach, you have to decide for yourself what choices that you want to make with regard to your own boat and your own products. So with that said, I went with the AlumiProtect, and I just want to mention a couple things here. When I'm painting a large surface area, like when I did the top side of the boat, we rolled and tipped, I just put a little snap-in pour spout on here, and we poured the paint because we were pouring a lot of paint, converters, and reducers, and it was easier. But for small amounts like painting the mast, when you're typically only going to use about 10 or 12 ounces at any one time, or even less for the boom when I'm only really painting about 4 ounces, it's just too inconvenient to pour over the spout and snap the lid, and there's a lot of wastage. So what I do is I'll just use a mixing cup that has these graduated scales on them. And I'm sure everybody has seen these. This actually works pretty good. I'll get these cheap little 1 ounce paint dispensers. I'm not sure what they are. They're about just a few pennies each, and I have a whole bunch of these. And I'll open up the lid to these bigger containers, and with a glove on my hand, a nitrile glove, I'll just scoop however much I need out of the container and pour it into here. So if it's a 1-to-1, I'm using this 1-to-1 graduated scale, and I'll put in, 2 ounces, and then I go to a clean dispenser for the converter, and I'll pour 2 ounces in, and when I have it to that line, now it's going to be up to here to the second line, then I stir it, and that's how I'll dispense it into my cup. That's worked really well for me. It's a lot simpler. You're going to lose some containers, but it's a small price to pay, given the huge mess that you can make if you're pouring it over the spout or snapping a pour lid in. It's just a technique that I have started using over the last few years. Anyway, so the first coating that you're going to see after I sanded the metal with 60 grit is I applied the Alumiprep. Now, one other thing I wanted to mention that I've learned over time is you do not want to wipe metal down that you've sanded with a rag and solvent. What happens is there's little teeth on the surface, and it will snag the cloth and the fiber in what you're wiping down, and it will be left behind. You won't see it, and then when you put the paint on there, it'll serve as a wick, and it'll pull moisture down in there and cause it to fail. What I did is after I sanded it, I just used a compressed air hose and I blew everything off, and then I went right in and I applied the product to it without wiping it down. Once you don't have bare metal anymore, once you have a painted surface on there, then you can go back to sanding and wiping with a solvent. It's just that bare metal. This is what the Alumiprep looks like, part A and part B. Part A is the base, that's the yellow stuff. Part B is the converter. And I just mixed up a small batch. It's 1-to-1. So I use these little measuring cups to dip into the paint cans. Otherwise, it's just too messy to try to pour it over the rim. So I just pour in 2 ounces of base and then 2 ounces of the converter with a different cup, obviously, and then stir it. And we let it induct. That means to let it sit. So it inducts for 15 minutes and then roll it on. Nothing to it. This is the first coat of Alumiprep that dried overnight. We'll coat it with the second coat of Alumiprep, and then followed by a hot coat of 545 primer. After I applied the first coat of Alumiprep, I followed the instructions to allow for the normal amount of time to pass before I applied the second coat. Then I went and applied the second coat of Alumiprep. And one of the techniques I used here is I wanted to hot coat the first coat of primer to the last coat of Alumiprep. And what that means is you let it set up till it's tacky. You put your glove on it and you'll feel the glove kind of pull away. It's kind of sticking to the surface. And then you apply that first coat of primer. I discussed that with Pettit paints before I did it, and I also talked to Awlgrip about it to make sure that I wasn't doing something that was going to cause a problem. It just gives you a better bond between the two. The 545 primer comes in at least 2 colors, gray and white. I switched to white 545 primer because I was using a white top coat. It just made sense to me that I'd get better coverage. I've done it both ways. Can't really tell the difference, but that's what I did. You have to pay attention to the mix ratios on these paints between spraying and when you roll and tip or brush and tip. They're different. The ratios for 545 primer for brush and tip is 1-to-1, and I use T0006 for the reducer, although it doesn't take much. Very little, in fact. This is 545 Awlgrip primer, finish primer, and it's mixed 1:1. We're going to hot coat this to the last coat of Alumiprep, which means it's still tacky, so you get sort of a chemical bond between the Alumiprep and the 545 primer. So I've sanded the 545 primer. You can see a little bit of the Alumiprep peeking through, but not much. It's in pretty good shape. We'll touch up the sanding a little more. This is with 220, then I'll lightly scuff it with some 320 before we put the first coat of Awlgrip on it. Finally, it was time to apply the Awlgrip top coat to the boom. As in some of the other products, the ratios for mixing between spraying and rolling and tipping are different, so you got to read the instructions carefully. In this case, it happens to be 2:1. 2 parts of base to 1 part converter, and then I thin to 30%. I talk about that when I apply it. You'll actually see that. That's very important to get the reducer thinner, to use an appropriate amount so it goes on very thin. If you don't thin it enough, you'll get sags and curtains and brush marks. As before, I used the graduated scale on the cup. I used a 2:1 scale, 2 parts of the base. I poured it in there, let it sit, just let it sit until it's level. Then I poured the converter till it just sits right on top. You'll see them separated, one right on top of the other. And you can mix it then if you like before you add the thinner. You just don't want to cover up your graduated scale. And I tend to just pour the thinner right in on top of it until here it only goes to 25%. So I just go to 25% and then I just add a little bit more to make sure I had enough. And then I stirred it, and I think it's helpful. It depends. One technique is just to take it from this cup that you stirred it and then pour it into your dispensing cup. That way you know that everything that you mixed goes into your dispensing cup that you're going to brush from, and there's not excess residue, clinging to the side somewhere, and you end up with some kind of unmixed paint or converter or whatever on your brush and causing you a problem. I don't know that it would, but that's typically how I do it. I just try to eliminate every opportunity for something to go wrong. Pretty simple to do it. It's quick and easy, and the one thing I like about these little cups is you can mix as little as you want. You don't have to worry about pouring too much. Another precaution that I like to take for painting is to use these inexpensive paper paint strainers. Over time, you're going to get dried paint in these paint cans, and even in the converter, there'll be little dried pieces of converter on the top that'll get poured into your paint, and that'll mess up your finish. So anything that's going to go into the cup that I'm dispensing from, I always run it through these inexpensive strainers, just to make sure that I get the best mixture, the purest mixture of paint that I can get. Over the years, I've done a lot of sanding. And while I started out using rubber sanding blocks like a lot of people, I don't use those anymore. I don't think I've used them in many years. So what I typically use now are sanding blocks I make from what I would call blue board. Is what they call it at Lowe's. I don't know why this is green. I don't know where I got this from, but pink board at Home Depot. And this happens to be, I don't know what this is, 3/4 inch, I think. What I do is I cut these to whatever size I want the block to be, and I put the abrasive paper on that and use these. And that way I can make it any shape or size I want. And what I rely on is this adhesive abrasive paper. And I don't remember what width this is. It's like 2 1/4 inches or 2.5 inch wide, whatever it is. And it's adhesive on one side. And I have it in all different grits. It's adhesive over here. And what I do is I cut the board to that width. And that way, all I have to do is I'll cut these blocks down to whatever length I want them to be. sticking one surface on there and I roll it out, and then I just cut the paper off. And I can have sandpaper on both sides. I can put it on the edge if I need it to be, whatever I want. Here's one I have on a small piece of board. I just sand some small area that I need to sand that maybe I couldn't get a bigger block in. And this works really well. You get this paper in all different grits. Another thing I've used is this 3M maroon pad. I think this is supposed to be about the same as 320 grit paper. And I've used gobs and gobs of this. I buy by the box full. I recently was introduced to this 3M superfine pad. A guy at the boatyard gave it to me. They're very expensive, but it really works great and it lasts a long time. And I use this on the mast. What I did is, because I needed a little bit of something firm, but I still wanted to be able to bend it, is I could use it over a pad like this, some soft pad. That would allow it to curve a little bit. Sometimes you just need something that'll bend a little bit, and this worked really well sanding the mast. But I very seldom will sand with my fingers on something, because you can't control the pressure that well, and what you end up doing is creating an uneven surface on the material that you're sanding, whether it's wood or in this case aluminum. You're not getting that perfectly flat surface. And so when you're putting multiple coats of paint on it, now you don't have a perfectly flat surface. Over time it just begins to multiply the effect. So these are some techniques that I've used over the years, and again, I highly recommend using this insulation board that you get at the big box store. Here's one with a abrasive paper on both sides. Works great. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm brushing and tipping the boom. And the technique that I have found that works best for me is to use two brushes. One to brush on the Awlgrip, and the other to tip it out. You always tip towards the direction you just painted. And there's the tip. And the technique I learned, make sure your tipping is light, you don't leave brush marks. I just say to myself, light as a feather. So you just use the one brush in the Awlgrip, because it will swell from the solvents in here and go bad about halfway down the boom. And then I take the one I'm tipping and I replace it and pull out another one for the tipping. So the tipping then becomes the brushing, and I just set the bad brush down. Again, you concentrate on the overlap area, switch brushes, and you tip. You have to mix this paint very thin, so I'm using almost 30% thinner. It's counterintuitive. You think you want it to be thicker, but you don't. It needs to be thin so it won't sag. And if you do this right, it will look sprayed. You're actually putting more paint on it than when you spray, because a lot of the paint is lost in the air. Brushing is quite effective, and though I wear a respirator, it's not near as dangerous as spraying Awlgrip. Doesn't work for everything, but I've had great results. When you first put it on, you'll see these little bubbles, but they'll dissipate, and then when you tip out, light as a feather, you'll notice those bubbles are gone. My daughter will give you a little close-up down the boom to show you how flat
that paint looked. You might have a few holidays here and there, areas that you miss until you gain experience, so you know what you're looking for. But that's true of anything. And that's all there is to it. You have to 1 coat a day, sand between coats. So spray and 3 coats a day and you're done. No sanding, rolling and tipping. 1 coat a day, sand between coats. So it's more work, but it's safer. And you don't have overspray and all the equipment that professional sprayers have to have. Light as a feather. Light as a feather. Good light is important. So you can see what you're doing. And that's all there is to it.
This would be the 3rd coat and final coat. Looks sprayed to me anyway. So what I'm doing now is I'm putting a little bit of this UHMW tape. It's adhesive on one side. I got it from my tristle track because it's stainless. You don't want to put that on aluminum. That a barrier between it. So these are my lazy jack blocks. You can see I just put a little bit of it on there and trace or trim it with a razor blade. Then I'll put it on the boom. So there's the fasteners. These are 1024s with the Tef gel. And I just screw that right into the boom. There's one other thing I wanted to mention. Anytime you have stainless on aluminum, you run the risk of corrosion, bubbling paint. And even Tef gel, as good as it is, sometimes, over time, you can get bubbling right around these fasteners. But what I did this time is I used these black nylon washers as an isolation barrier between the stainless and the aluminum, and I use them in a lot of places. Obviously there's UHMW tape under all the stainless fasteners. I think we covered that earlier. All of them have it. Tef gel for all the fasteners, but again, these washers. And I've used them in lots of different places, so I have high hopes for them. The boom is complete. Ran a new outhaul, 1/4 inch Dyneema. Reefing lines are run. I've saved this slot for the 3rd reef, the reefing line for the 3rd reef, which I don't have. I'm going to add it. These are for preventers. If I use the traditional style, I don't. I would use the bang preventer system that it works for my boat. If you look in there, there's G10 backing plates. Pad eyes for the aft end of the lazy jacks. Main sheet system, we've already talked about the reinforcing rods in there. I've got aluminum bars in there that run from about here to here, and then another one that runs from here to here for the bangs. This is my leather chafing guard I built for the 3rd voyage. That sits on the gallows frame that just protects the boom. These are blocks for lazy jacks. There's a halyard exit box, not halyard, reefing exit box for the 3rd reef. Lazy jack blocks, 2nd reef, 1st reef, winch pad, the winch. It's polished because it had a lot of corrosion on it. I don't normally polish them. I'd rather just be dark brown or some green on it. But there's a lot of corrosion in it. So I polished that up. These cleats are for the forward end of the lazy jacks where they can be adjusted. 3rd reef, 2nd reef, 1st reef, because I can remember that. 1st, 2nd, 3rd, from front to rear. Over here is the outhaul. And that's like a 5 or 6 to 1 purchase, and it's real easy. One hand you can tighten the outhaul down. So that goes to the boat tomorrow. Glad that's complete. Shiny new boom. If you enjoyed this episode of Far Reach Voyages, let us know in the comments. Also, consider liking and subscribing, as it tells us you would like to see more videos and it helps the channel grow. See you in the next episode.